to, um, like what would the action take to incorporate these sorts of, like what the neighbor now, and kind of, and use funding that could be utilized and kind of, and she's really has that, they doing the, so the city, um, family to actually do the entire, to begin the quarter of the project, but, she
by East Rock Park Commission, so-called East Rock Park Commission. Who represents East Rock is on the board. But there is no East Rock Park Commission. And I think there's been one for a generation. So I just don't, what we found out, I believe, Chair, Vice Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the current permanent members would select the third member as the vacancy opened up. Because there is no East Rock Park Commission, am I correct on that? Were they actually self-appointed? Yeah, and so an argument can be made that they've been on there illegally anyhow, but the path of least resistance was to allow for phase out. The other alternative considered is eliminating, getting rid of the Park Commission and then creating a new entity, the Parks and Recreation Commission. And while we did the research on that, I was surprised to find out there's a number of large cities that do not have Parks Commission. So it's not an absolutely critical commission, but it's a big constituency in New Haven. I think there'd be a big move on that if you eliminated it and did replace it immediately. So that's the reason we approached it that way. They have an argument that you are taking something away from them, entitlement. I think we have a counter argument that David who appointed you, not appointed legally. So I think an argument can be made. And so the real question for you is, do you accept the case of least resistance, the approach we're taking, or do you, take an approach that would lead to a legal confrontation? So we took the point of least resistance. The next issue is item number 8. These are a number of items that we modified the time frame for the sunsets that were created in the last charter revision. We have a number of department head qualifications, purchasing department provisions that we placed in the charter 10 years ago that should have been converted to all ordinance. I would strongly recommend that let's see what we can do to get it done before November, so that when this charter is approved, when this charter is approved, we can take the provisions out. So we changed the date so that if you don't do it, you got to do it with something through the adoption of the charter. That is in Article 15. Look at Article 15. You'll see the sections that should be sunsetted going forward. A very simple change on the time for approval of nominees to boards and commissions from 60 to 90 days. As the chair pointed out, we took no action on the residency request by the mayor. In regard to some other items, traffic authority, maybe somebody else knows this besides you not now. I know that there's some legislation for the General Assembly this year that will permit traffic authorities to be separated from police commissions. If that happens, there's no impediment. There's nothing in your charter that prevents you from being able to create a traffic. So there was no need to act. And now the police commission is the traffic authority in every community in the state because it's required by statute. If the statute has changed, there's nothing we can do with charter that would facilitate it. It's up to the state legislation. If they change it, you can set up a separate traffic authority. Minor modifications that we referred to a little bit on the qualifications for the Board of Health members. We eliminated some specific language regarding what type of doctors of medicine should serve, and just left it as doctors of medicine. We eliminated the language so that they would have to have 5 years of experience in clinical medicine, public health administration, college and university teaching in any branch of the medical science. And I think the theory behind this was that we're still retaining the MD requirement, but it might be somebody who has a broader background in epidemiology or some other areas, maybe environmental justice, and there are any number of areas that might be allowable to serve on the commission. You left the MD requirement in there. The last 2 points I want to talk about a little bit. I was there the vice chair, the majority leader. really spearheaded this whole research. He got the idea from me in this area. But I was we talked about it earlier. What we did was I have taken a position over the years. I've done charters all over the state, and when I were you serve, I actually thought about this way back then in the 1980s when most of you were probably very young people, as was I. That the charter should be constitutional documents. You don't want to set up the government in the charter. Traditionally, the government is set up in the charter. You want to have, and you have to have a chief executive, the mayor, and a legislative body, the board of aldermen. Those are the only two things you actually need in your charter. I believe you should have a budget process charter. I think voters should be able to see this is how the budget works. How an ordinance is established, that should be in the charter. So members of the public can see that there is a system and that there is a protocol for the adoption of ordinances. I don't think you should name or have to name every department in the charter or every board and commission in the charter. And it usually takes a lot more time, and we're going to work on this in the next week or two. But what we're going to try to do at the behest of the commission and the leadership of the majority leader and the chair of the commission is I've been meeting with the department heads. We had the first meeting with a group of them the other night, yesterday afternoon, and I'm meeting with the rest of them on Monday. And what I'm going to try to do with the departments is to delineate all the department heads that are subject to mayoral appointment and review and approval by the board of aldermen. So you'll see all their titles and jobs in there. You'll see a provision also that their qualifications need to be established by ordinance. We've already kind of done that 10 years ago. We tried to move those things. Those are the ones I just talked about, need to be established. And I urge you to establish them as soon as you can, maybe in a summer project or something for the board of aldermen. I mean, but I did. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to lay out, as opposed to there will be some departments in the charter. So I don't want you to be shocked to see some of the departments. I think you need to have the corporation council, you need to have the controller, you need to have tax collector, assessor, the central organs of the government that make sure that the government operates, procurement. Those things will probably be in the charter. A little less detailed, because I think a lot of the details that are in the charter come from a period of time before the Home Rule Act. Not to be pedagogue, but when the Home Rule Act came into effect in the late 1950s. And so and we're going to move a lot of that stuff to the Code of Ordinances. But with regard to most of the other departments, I would include police and fire, public, whatever you call them, public works today. Remember, you changed that. Parks and public works kind of merged. Your charter doesn't say that. Charter still has those other departments in there. Those we're going to lay out the functions. I've asked the department heads and the corporation council, and I were just talking about this. Still here, yeah. We're going to try to work on this. We want to lay out the functions of government in the charter, things that the charter should be doing. It's going to be fairly broad, and it may be you may not like it, but it's going to lay out the functions of the government. We're going to keep in the charter until you adopt it. In chapter 15, or the infamous chapter 15, every provision we move out of the department section can be put in 15, will remain in 15 until you create an ordinance for the departments that exist, and the Corp Council signs off that all the functions that are laid out in the charter that are here to serve the public are met with the ordinance being adopted. So you need, before you act on it, you want to have an opinion of the Corporation Council stating that the charter functions are being met. And that's kind of the direction we're taking. Same thing on boards and commissions. Some of the boards, particularly City Plan, for example, which is a special act based board, and very careful not to eliminate the functions that are special act based that still need to be kept in place. They'll remain in there. I think civil service should remain in the charter as a charter commission. There may be a few others, but a number of the boards and commissions will be mandated. But they won't be in the charter, they'll be in chapter 15. until you do something about it. But the idea is you move them over into the code of ordinances. And the theory here is that you're elected every 2 years or every 4 years, depending on what the voters decide, if you support the position of the commission on the term of office, and the mayor is as well. And there should be some degree of flexibility as you're adopting budgets and approving budgets, and as times change, to make decisions about what your government should look like, what a reorganized government should look like. And you don't want your charter to be an impediment. We already have in the charter provisions that allow for reorganization. You read through that we adopted those 10 years ago. Michael was the chair of that commission as well. And those were really innovative provisions. But it's occurred to me that while they're there, you exercised it, I think, you did the Parks and Public Works merger, but there was no mechanism for taking the current departments out of the charter. And so I think it's better to have it done in real time through ordinance, budget, so that the functions will always be in the charter. So the fact is, once you create these new entities, get the opinion of the Corporation Council that everything's been validated, that the functions have been validated, you still are going to have to go through a similar process every time you amend the charter, amend your ordinances over the course of time. Under the Home Rule Act, you have enormous authority. Charters don't need to be as complicated as they were. One of the charters in Norwalk that I'm fixing is a charter that goes back to 1913. It's 1913. And I've now created my first real reconstruction charter after all these years of doing it. It's kind of interesting. We'll see what happens. But but it's a much thinner charter than the charter that they have now. And they still have a welfare club, which we haven't had in a generation, 2 generations at this point. So I want to explain that that's here. It's a big task. I think it's achievable. I'm going to sit down and start working on heavy drafting next week once I get through the second set of meetings with department heads. I'll be consulting with leadership and with the leadership of our commission as well. And hopefully by the 20th, well before the 20th, we'll have a product for you to look at. So I want to explain why it's starting like this. Is a little unusual. It was brought up deeper into the process. I was resistant. I will tell you, Shirley will probably confirm that even though it was theory, it was a theory that I had. I was worried that we just didn't have the time to do it. He's such an inspirational leader that persuaded me that I did have the capacity to get this done for you, and by golly, we'll do it. And so that's why it's not in the concept is we were asking you for the recommendation back to the commission. And so we'll frame it in a way, and we'll try to consult with the commission as well. Because on this one, I want to make sure that we don't have any variation, that we really have a proposal that will be readily acceptable. Because at this point in charter revision, you start narrowing down what you can do. And so what we'll probably do is when you adopt the language, we'll say we want to have something of this nature, which will allow for flexibility in negotiation when it goes back to the to Michael's commission, when it goes back to you. So that's it for me in terms of where we are. If you think about both departments and boards and commissions. Should I talk about procedure a little bit? Is that all right? So we're at the point where we're sending it over to you. And it's a relatively modest charter revision process that we're going through. This time we did a big one 10 years ago. And it's going to have to be bigger now if we're dealing with boards and commissions and departments, but it's a relatively modest process. So we're not going to have a lot of time before the Board of Alders. You guys are going to expedite your time, accelerate your time with us. So at this point, what happens is you will make recommendations. We know there's going to be recommendations because unless you reject the concept that I just talked about with boards and commissions and departments, we know there's recommendations back to the Charter Revision Commission. There may be in other areas as well. I've heard some rumblings about some of the issues. It'll go back to the Charter Commission. The charter commission can have up to 30 days. They're not going to take 30 days. So the objective is to get this back to you in early July, according to the schedule that legislative services work out chairs of the bodies here and the chair of the charter commission. And at that point, it comes back to you. And at that point, all you can do is vote up or down in whole or in part on what comes back to you in the final report. And so we will lay out in a similar way that the chair laid out his letter to you, what we have done. And so, for example, give an example that you're not going to like. You have a 4-year term for mayor and the 4-year term for board of alders, and you want to get rid of the 4-year term for board of alders. I doubt you will, but that is an example of what you would reject in part. Except you accept the board of alders 4-year term, and you reject the mayor's 2-year term, a 4-year term, and keep it that way. So you can do that or accept the whole thing, or you just accept the whole plan. Is the other element. There's no amendment at that point. The only thing you can do is vote up or down. It's an unusual legislative methodology. You guys are used to having total discretion to do whatever you want with legislation. So was I. And as I started doing these charter revisions and started learning the law and how it works, it's an unusual concept. I think in this case, hopefully not a difficult concept, because I think that most of the stuff is stuff that's charter commission to do, and I think we should be in good shape. That's where it ends up. Then the same at some point, either that night in July, depending on where we are, or at your meeting in August, you would approve one question or multiple questions. I don't think anyone wants to talk to me. I'm talking about that at all. It's a board of alders decision on what they do. Sometimes commissions make recommendations on what to do. I'm not sure there's anything really controversial in this one. I think the term of office is. It tends to be in some communities. I'll just tell you anecdotally. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the Hamden Charter Commission thought about the 4-year term, and they were shouted down the 4-year term. And everybody was fighting, so all of a sudden we're going and the rest of everything else passed. 2 years ago, we had the same issue come up with Camden, or last year, and they adopted the mayor only the legislative council. They had a theory that they want to have balance with legislative council running every 2 years if they were the 4-year term. And I said to the president, do you want to separate out the 4-year term? I will point out there was not much opposition on the record to it. Even the minority party, the Republican Party, really wasn't speaking out against it as they normally do in many communities. And they decided to do one omnibus question, including the 4-year term. And I said, what an evolution that we could move in that direction where they made a political judgment that it wasn't really controversial and they weren't worried about losing their whole package. And but of course, Mr. Paddock, called the president because we actually had an extra meeting. Donnie Fires, everybody knows Donnie, is president of our legislative council. And I said to her, I said, I'm very nervous, even though there's no opposition. What if something comes out, all of a sudden seriously wins and the charter revision to the 4-year term? And Donnie stood her ground and said, nope, I'm not worried about it. And she was right. There really wasn't reached a point of maturity in that political environment where the 4-year term wasn't controversial. In Norwalk, where I'm going through it right now, they are definitely going to the second question because they lost it 10 years ago and they're worried about losing it again. So that's a local question, and that you'll have to decide politically. But we haven't talked about that. And then the last element of it, this is the last thing to say with these questions, and that is Michael in his role. He's played so many roles. He's such a talented figure in the city. As city and town clerk, has the statutory ability to put out an explanatory text. It's money that could be spent by the city putting together an explanation of the charter. You have to publish it in the newspaper also, but the explanatory text is something that could be on the polling places, can be sent to libraries, schools, bodegas, other stores, any place you want to put it, that just lays out an objective statement of what the Charter Revision Commission has done. You can't say vote yes on this. It simply says what we did with the 4-year term. This is what we did with the board of commissions. And that's what it does. We did do that 10 years ago. And so that's the last task that I usually take out of work with the city clerk, sitting down for on developing beyond that. And then you have your referendum in November. And so we have this around any questions.
Oh, just review it and thank you for all the work that you've done. Also, thank you for putting all this together. For giving me that.
Well, you're right.
I just want to, the vice chair, pleasure to work with, Steve again, Charter Commission, certainly pleasure working with the entire commission. Vice chair was, very, active, really making sure that the, concerns of school voters will carry on. Yes, and the commission. Hopefully, as a whole, vice chair is really careful to walk my dad. Meetings up and making sure that they are scheduled and do not. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Before going further, I want to acknowledge a few of our colleagues, our holders this came in, all the Edwards, all the Crespo, all the Arana, and all the Gonzalez.
Rodriguez.
Rodriguez. And this one. Okay, so thank you. And so questions, that was a lot. Yes, it's a whole lot.
Probably should have stopped after the section one.
Questions.
Well,
No, that'll be your decision. We're not there yet.
outlines a lot of this stuff, and so I'm pretty sure somebody has a question.
I have
Okay,
just one little clarification about the home rule act. Can you just touch on that a little bit? Maybe?
Yeah, thank you, Alder Douglas. It's nice to see you as always. What should I do without getting into a full lecture mode? The Home Rule Act was adopted in 1957. Prior to 1957, all of our cities and towns were granted their authority to govern by special act, meaning that the General Assembly gave you your power. So your delegation, Gary and Marty and Pat Dillon and all the people in the House, their job would be, if the mayor and the board of alders said we want to have get rid of the board of finance, or have a board of finance, or have a health commission, or have a health department, the General Assembly would amend the special act. It was done in Hartford by the legislature. So it was law, state law, that created your communities. What they did in 1957, they got British counties, is they gave local legislative bodies, not the mayor, the legislative body, not the first selectwoman or selectman in a smaller town, but the town meeting or the board of selectmen itself, would have the ability to adopt their local charter. And the Home Rule Act delineates under the municipal powers portion of it, all the powers you have. And 10 years ago, we got rid of a number of old provisions. And you want to be careful when you do that. I'm literally going to do that, as I told you, normal as we speak. And so it gave you the ability to adopt a charter. And so over the years, and I went through this when I was sitting in your seat. We had one charter revision when I was on the board of alders in the 80s, in the early 90s. And over the years, the charter was, piecemeal reviewed and amended. And, up until 10 years ago, we really hadn't hesitated. We finally decided to annotate, went back and took a look at the history of it. We wanted to make sure that we didn't get rid of the part of the authority. And the planning, a lot of the mechanisms are based in special act. The commission itself, zoning authority that you have in most communities, you have a zoning commission that under Title 8 of the general statutes, the zoning commission. In New Haven, the board of aldermen is the zoning commission. In fact, when I first found that out, I said, "What is the commissioner?" And but it's a very interesting and useful authority. I got to tell you, I'm used to it, and I was very interested. But New Haven has that. Most communities do not. One of the other cities I'm working around, Stanford, has even a more radical system of zoning. They have public. You can petition to the Board of Representatives, the equivalent of the Board of Alders in Stanford, and appeal planning commission items and zoning commission items to the Board of Alders. Really incredible and interesting. Westport has the same thing. So you have so we have to be mindful of special acts and make sure we don't take muscle out of the body when we're conducting the surgery on the charter. And so these things were done piecemeal over the years. And our charter, Lucas will testify to this, well, that 10 years ago, we did a lot of restructuring of the charter. We really tried to modernize it. There's a few, is something I'm doing or is it saying? Oh, back up. So, we try to just organize it a little differently. There are still some provisions in there we might want to look at, but I think we're going to look at a lot of them as we're going through this department, the department exercise this time around. So we should be okay with that. And so that's what the Home Act does. It enables us to have power and authority. And I just want to point out, and I talked about this when I came before you at the beginning of the process, and that is you only have the powers that are expressly granted to you by the legislature. So home rule doesn't mean inherent power. It doesn't mean that you have natural powers. Yeah, well, the special act provision is grandfathered in, but you are not a sovereign. The state is a sovereign. The federal government is a sovereign. You're a municipal corporation. So that's what you are. So you think of ourselves as legislators, but we're all members of a board of directors, in effect, of a municipal corporation. That's different because everything we have is granted by the state. We're an instrumentality of the state, creature of the state. That's something like a Frankenstein monster, but that's what we are. We're not free to do what we want to do. I used the President Pro Tem and I were a little bit earlier. When I was here, I wanted to do something when I was sitting in the older in the 26th seat. We were trying to do gun control in the late 1980s. I tried to find all different ways of getting in there because the state was not doing anything. We tried to do public health, zoning, everything. And that's what I learned. Even though I was a lawyer, I learned about the express grants authority, and if you don't have express grants, you don't have. But we discovered in Norwalk this year, when we were going through a special act and knocking out about 80 items from the charter because they're all covered by the Home Rule Act, they have the ability to regulate guns in Norwalk, and we're keeping that in that charter now. They'll end up before the Supreme Court if they decide to exercise it, I'm sure, but we're going to leave it in their charter and see if they do it. Has the ability to be careful. Very, very vast authority is conferred by the state. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Barbara. Anyone have any additional questions? The question that I have is moving. I remember years ago they had a lot of these boards information in the charter, and the reason was because most of them weren't acted upon. And unless someone brought it to their attention that like early childhood was in it. But no one ever created a early childhood commission.
So I brought it to the board's attention that they created one. So is this so we make changes to the resolution and makes it easier for the Board of Aldermen to make the changes than it would be to go to leave it in the charter and then have recommendations done, then we want to do it in 10 years from now?
Well, what we're trying to do with boards and commissions, and I'll refer to, the majority leader and the chair, on this, is we want to leave the commissions that we think need to be left intact in the charter. It shouldn't go away. The Board of Ethics should be in the charter. Politicians, no matter how good they, all of us operate in, should not be able to get rid of a Board of Ethics. That should exist. In Waterbury, we kept an audit commission, an independent audit commission, because Waterbury needed it. This is the beginning of the century, and Waterbury's done pretty well. There's a very innovative commission that we did in 2002. But just about every other commission, even a police commission, doesn't need to be in the charter. It should be in the code of ordinances because the laws are evolving in just about every area. The other thing that you need to look at, this is really true, I think, in the last decade, I've been seeing around the state, is the civic culture. In a lot of communities, we find, and you may even have the provisions already in the charter, we find that it's hard to find people who serve on boards. And so if you have all of these board and commissions written in stone in your charter, and you say, it would make sense to consolidate this board with another board, this is what that gives the ability to do. At some point, we may merge police and fire, because you may look at that as a holistic kind of protective services entity. I'm not recommending that. I'm not urging you to do that, but it's a concept that I've read about, seen, that you can have protective services merge. And this gives you the ability to do that, or it gives you the ability, I have a community, has a mental health commission and a health commission. You really need both. You know, why do they need to be separate? Why can't you, so if there's 5 members on each, why don't you create a 7-member body or a 9-member body and consolidate them because we can't find people to serve on them. So this gives you the ability to just operate your government in a way that, is really conducive with the times, and many of them will be mandated. So you need to have commissions, but they're not going to be laid out in the charter. And that's what you need to get and do with the ordinances after the charter is adopted.
Now, the second part of my question is, what if per se, we decide to create a new commission? It doesn't go into the charter, it goes by code of ordinances.
Totally with the ordinance.
Got it.
And let me tell you, there's not a commission that you would want to create that you can't create. I think that the Home Rule Act and the municipal powers provisions of it are so broad, I just can't imagine the subject matter, including guns. If you wanted to look at gun violence, you can't do much about it legislatively. But if you want to review the issue as a health matter or whatever it is, I don't think there's any impediment to that at all. So you would be operating through the ordinance.
Okay, thank you so much. That was helpful. I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I want to recognize Alder Haywood, thank you for his being here. And, Alder Wingate, is next on queue.
Thank you for all the work that you putting all these lovely boards together and the legislation. Thank you so much. I have 2 questions. The first question is to walk me through a little bit in reference to how the 4-year term will stop, right? Between if it's achieved, and what year would that actually start for the orders and potentially for the
2027. And the reason for 2027, the reason for that is we have the 2 elected members of the Board of Education. And so what we have to do is we have to, in one of the cycles, have a 2-year term for one of the members of the Board of Education, so that by 2027, every city elected official, alders, Board of Education, and mayor, city clerk, can align. And that's the reason that this was put out to 2027 to allow for that reverse stagger. We talk about staggering things we're reversing the stagger so that everybody is on the line in the same side.
But you can, the next one, so this was clarification, which I totally support. The president pay is, on this page is, $6,250 a month. And if you turn to the next page, it's page 5, it says $6,500, which I support.
Well, then I think the title is, we have the charter. We might have been title in the body. I think 6050 is the right, 6050 is the right number, sorry.
Now, she's works more, but I'm just wanting to make sure that's good.
We'll take her up to dinner.
Okay.
Compensate our loss.
I just want to make sure as we move forward, it's clear. Okay? Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's not a violation of code of ethics.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will go for it. Well, thank you for the presentation, it was really helpful. I just have one quick question, about the moving certain boards and commissions to the Code of Ordinances. I know you mentioned one of the things that we could do if we were to accept that input, for that option would be to potentially allow us to merge certain commissions, boards and commissions together. And so my question is there anything else maybe out there that we might be able to do? I guess maybe I'll throw out a hypothetical. If we wanted to, I don't know, change the qualifications of say a board of commission, that move into
Absolutely.
we'd be able to do
You
that.
have total carte blanche on that. Some of the boards and commissions in your charter do have qualifications. I started using that in Hartford in 2002 when we, the Board of Education reform in Hartford. We wanted to make sure that if you were moving in Hartford, they were moving from an all-elected board to a appointed and elected board. You can't establish qualifications for elected officials. You were all appointed. So you can't establish those qualifications. We wanted to make sure that one of the benefits of having these qualities is that the mayor and the council of Hartford would have the ability to appoint a varied group of citizens to serve, racially, gender, regions of Hartford, neighborhoods of Hartford, backgrounds. And so all those things can play in. We have that in the charters. So that would give you an opportunity to look at every board and make a determination about what the reasonable qualifications be and what the function should be. And you have that ability. But I think you have that ability anyhow, because the charter creates a commission. If the charter says commission is X, Y, and Z, you can't really change the X, Y, and Z in the charter, but you can add, double A, double D, double C to the function by ordinance, even in the current charter. You can't eliminate function. And with the change that we're recommending, except for the commissions that are in the charter, you can totally change what those commissions do and how they do it. State law may change in certain areas and more independent.
And just as a quick follow-up question like that, and that means, those certain board and commissions, they can have separate qualifications from one another. Like there's nothing in the charter that says qualification of a member of a board commission must be X, Y, and Z, and that applies to every one of them.
It does. What we did 10 years ago is we established in Article 7 of the Charter the things that need to be in an ordinance. The concept that we adopted 10 years ago is that we want to start moving these things. Even before we did what we're doing this year, the concept of still need 3 ordinances for these things. We want to make sure there's some uniformity. And one of the things that it does talk about is that the ordinance needs to take into account simple things like the appointment of the chair, how to deal with public, keeping the records and the agendas, and how to keep, make sure that the public participation in the ordinance, encourage public participation, make sure that
to have broad representation on those boards and commissions, and that, there's a frequency requirement to make sure, so it just said those things have to be addressed. And so each board can address it differently. Each board may have a different need, and different protocols that make sense, for the functions that they're serving. And so this gives you maximum flexibility.
I think I'm hearing him, Counselor, if I may. Are you heading towards the addition of undocumented residents?
I think sort of, yeah, but I think also,
So be clear with your questions so that we can have the real discussion. So if it's that, then let's address that here so that we can have an understanding. I think that's an important topic to understand.
yeah.
Because we have residency requirements on the majority of our units, except for the Q house. And so, so let's have that discussion so that we can be clear about that. And I think I heard the underlying thing and I want to make sure that I want a big answer.
I didn't hear that in my question. Yeah. We have an electoral requirement, charter, another residency requirement. And so that was not ultimately addressed by the commission. So, somebody who's not an elector, you would have a 50 time serving on a board of commission. And so if we wanted to do that, I think means it stated, I'm not sure if means yet enough. I have to take a look at the legalities. I don't think there's any do it. You may say that you have discretion to add non-electors to boards and commissions to expand potential representation on that. We do have boards and commissions that have in other communities. I think we have anything in Dayton. Hartford has a commission that requires having somebody with special auditing ability. You don't have to be a resident of the city. But they allow you have to have a business connection of the city to do that. So there is some flexibility. It was not addressed by the commission. And that's what we want to look at. I'll try to take a look at that issue.
I think I was kind of trying to build up to that, kind of get a broader idea of, if that could be done, get that context, but I appreciate it. We're there.
I like it the way.
Getting us directly there. But I think it would be great. I mean, maybe explore something like that. I think last quarter, we had some commission that raised up, doing a little deep reading into.
I don't remember that. I'm elderly, so I don't remember.
Obviously get through, but, I think it would be great to, for that.
We may address, because we may not be able to get a definitive answer on it, is to allow for resident, not just an elector requirement, but if the Board of Alders wants to establish a resident, an alternate residency requirement, if legally permitted, the Alders may do so. So that the default is an elector, and then the Alders in discretion may consider residency so long as it's legally permissible. I will try to come up with a definitive answer. I'm not sure I will, but that may be the way to address it if that's what you want to do. But that's the potential.
Yeah.
So.
It's more comment. It might make sense if residency can improve. And because we did talk about it, you weren't here to that day. So, but we did talk about it. And the issue with this would be how would we prove residency? Residency is proven currently. So if you're saying that you're a resident, then how is that pretty? How are we able to maintain saying that you're a resident of the city? You can say I'm a resident of this week and move to Hamlin. And so what would be that criteria to maintain residency? So that's the only issue that we had when we had that discussion with the elector. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So, just to be clear, one of the things, council, we're gonna look at your undocumented portion for documents to residents to be able to do a public works and commissions.
Yes.
What kind of language we could come up.
Do you still have the cards that the mayor discussed, the program was, I still. I'm just trying to think of the majority of the point, approved, was that effective? Was that, I don't know the end.
We're struggling with it currently. So that has to be for what about the boards or commitments recently, so we're still working with that to figure out, because there's a gap going on currently. And to get that card is really just difficult. So you have to have several documents that have to be official documents, bills with your names. So it's not quite as easy as going in and saying, well, I'm a resident. Here's a letter from grandma. Saying that.
So, no, we're not talking to yourself. We have, unfortunate, now everybody's jumping on that, and we do have a list. So I do have, the next person is Alder Marchand. However, I just want to make sure if you are all.
No, I went back with more directly,
I'm sorry, I didn't discern the majority of the time.
that's the name. I'm thinking out the room.
No, that's why we're here, because we gotta get this all out, because I mean, if I learned from our president and from the council, that charter revision is something that can be done every year, but we do also continue, so we want to make sure that we're covering everything that we can, and that's a very, very important topic, especially because it was mentioned 10 years ago, and we're still dealing with that, and so, council, you can, look in that and find some type of language that would be, very helpful, please. So, Alderman.
Thank you, Madam President, for that. Thank you, Attorney Mendick, for your work on this project, and I certainly want to thank the Chair and Vice Chair of the Commission and all the members of the Commission. I did attend a couple of meetings and viewed others on YouTube and have some sense of the discussion we had. It's clear that the Commission did not have a strong consensus, at least not yet, on the issue of residency requirements for departments. And so my sense is, and I would like you to correct me if I'm wrong, is that part of what you're asking is for us to provide us further guidance or recommendation on how to continue that discussion with your commissioners before that would come back to us. Is that correct? And could you give just some flavor of how that discussion went and what would be outstanding issues that people couldn't come to agreement on?
Yes, thank you, Alder Marchand, for the question. So it was a little confusing in the beginning because we had previous conversations with the administration. And it seemed as though in the beginning they were only looking for the board members to not have residency. Perhaps the only end of the list of, I think it's 22 positions that they wanted to have a meeting that was outside of the scope of our discussion with the administration, and so it would be better to bring that to the full board of alders and have that discussion with the administration from this body on what we should do and send that to us as a commission for the discussion.
Thank you for that answer. And then as a follow-up, if I may, just so I understand the process, we have this meeting tonight, we have a meeting on the 20th, which I got to have a public hearing on it. What is the expectation in this process for when this will formulate and deliver its further set of recommendations? Is that before the public hearing so that the public can comment on those? Or what's the time frame that you're looking at for
It's
our deliverable back to you?
It's a very good question. Normally, we have very few meetings in this process here. Usually you would have some deliberation so that when the public comes before you with the public hearing process, there's some sense of the issues that are being raised. What I would recommend in the current construct, I will be making recommendations on the departments and board and commissions. That will be public before the public hearing. I talked to the president and Mr. Lucas, and I will make sure that those are published. I will be coincide with the notice, not with the notice, will be posted soon thereafter. At least it's going to take some time to do. So that will be posted. If I come up with an answer on the residency issue, that will be posted before that meeting as well. So what I would recommend, and I hope I'm not opening a door here, is that if the alders have thoughts, they should be raised before the meeting, so that those thoughts are laid out somewhere. Maybe run it through the president to make sure that there's coordinated, coordinate that. But since there won't be any kind of formal or even informal action by the voters before the public hearing, at least give the public a sense of beyond what's in the body of the document, what are the thoughts that you are having? And then after that meeting, the intent, I think, is to have a deliberation. You act on the recommendation that I think that's great.
So just that I'm clear, if we have our meeting on the 20th, we need to at least, if we have any questions or comments, concerns, get that to you at least the week before the 20th.
Well, that's me. I think we should run it through the leadership. Yeah,
Leadership,
through the leadership, so that
whatever comes
Yeah.
through, that needs to get to you.
that should be in the notice, or that should be publicly posted in advance of the public hearing. So the public knows that 9 members of the board are interested in this issue, and that will be an issue that they'll discuss in deliberations following the public hearing. And so the public has an opportunity to say, we like Alder Marchand's concept, or we don't like this concept. And then you can act according to that night. And I think that then that night you vote on recommendations and recommendations from the commission. A meeting scheduled on the 29th of the month. That's like 9 days later. So that's my recommendation. That's what I thought. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it.
So what we can do, if there are any questions or anything, we'll have Allison notice everyone with a deadline of a date for any questions, comments, concerns that you have to get it back by that time. So leadership has the opportunity to look at those different.
And leadership may run some things by me if there's legal questions, and then I'm sure leadership will want to do that. So give enough time so we have that.
And we said, we should be prior to posting the notice for the 20th.
Yeah.
Right.
It should be done sufficiently so that the public has some idea what you guys are thinking about before you act on the 20th. If you're doing the hearing and the deliberation the same night, they should have some feel for what it is.
So we basically have, that's kind of that's what we're looking at. Because today is the 7th, right? So we have about yes, right. So a week for us because we got to go through these tiers, and so we'll have Al send out a notice. Just as a reminder to say if you have any questions, comments, concerns, things that you want, or back to the commission to have it back to him. That's the way that we can handle it, and then everyone has the same opportunity to express themselves. Right.
Not at this time. Thank you, Madam President.
So, next on the queue is all the request.
Thank you, Madam President, for that. And I just want to say thank you to the council commissioners and the committee for such a great job on this part. And my question revolves around, is it legally permissible to add language into the charter surrounding the way the management teams are planned? One of the things that I'm thinking of is the bylaws or something, maybe creating a commission to make it more accessible or more unified throughout the city. Given that there's a lot of inconsistencies or there's just, I don't know, too many different ideas of how they're ran. And I'm wondering if it's legally permissible to add some sort of language pertaining to the magnitudes in each district.
The management should not a city, commission or organization. They run autonomous. And we did get a brief attempt to try to give some regulation to that, by ordinance, which, didn't get very far. They were supposed to report back to us with their bylaws, and the authority decided that it wasn't necessary to come before this board because they don't report to the city. It's my opinion that if that's the case, we should start paying for the use of our public buildings, but that's a separate discussion. But because they are not, they're not under the authority of the city or the board of aldermen. I don't think it would be a good idea to include them in that way, because then that would require us to have oversight of what they do, and they are an autonomous, council.
I have no experience with management, people came in after I was here, I don't even know what the legal basis is, or, if they were created by, small issue form, then you clearly have a but I'm not sure how.
Yes, we've been involved.
I'm sorry to confirm, but I get it in the answer, it's not something I almost have.
Very good. Your name and. So, I'm Pat Kane, Corporation Counsel. I live at 32 District Terrace in Haven. My office has been involved with various members of this board in looking at issues about the community, just the management teams, and they were created by the New Haven Police Department, but they're not created by ordinance. There's nothing in the board, in the ordinances that creates them. And as I think the majority leader said, there is not much interest on their part in being affiliated with the city. And if we affiliated with them or bring them under the city umbrella of an ordinance, then we then assume responsibility for liability issues and other issues related to that. So I think it was basically left that we hope that they will have uniform bylaws, but it never, and with training opportunities, but that was as far as. Yes. Thank you. Now, I would note is recommending appointees for the civilian people. Yeah. They all come here with letters of recommendation for the CDBG,
Yes.
they might have had some funds allocated to them in the past. And I don't know if that practice continues.
Well, not about, I'm not speaking of the funds, but for any provider that wants funds from this CDBG, they have to get a letter of recommendation from the management teams, which. Well, this is what they tell us.
It's not required, it's not required, it's just not respect. The communities themselves.
Oh, okay. This is the summer, cloudy year. They occupy. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Madam President, for example, don't they get $10,000 from the city?
Every administration has their own focus.
Thank you. It's really nice.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Sure.
next we have Bruce Santan.
Thank you, Madam President, thank you. I should have asked this question before when I was talking. And one of the things that I struggled with, and I'm sure that Rick had done a wonderful job, and the chair and vice chair and everyone else that was involved. But when you begin to go on outside, when you're looking for the and it's usually on the whole time. And so the question is, if we have started to make them family opinions that are decided, and then still get on the board. How should we feel about that? But when particularly, I mean, we call the board mentioned to make it. But right now, it's somebody that is this on the somebody's safety test, which is not, in some cases, they can't meet because these people don't attend it. So then they don't replace those people, so the committees don't meet.
I'm taking a look. Reading in the charter. With the mayor of the state, in a certain period of time. When he does that. And we're always got the authority, so. With that, I don't see what's kind of here, but I'm doing that in charter as well. Okay. I'm just one final section, but there's an answer to your question. So. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Maybe we, I don't know if it's me, probably not. So basically that the, mayor fills the positions on any board or commission. And the mayor fails to propose a candidate for a vacancy within 60 days following the effective date of that vacancy. Then the board of alders may fill the vacancy within 90 days by a majority vote of the board of alders. And I did get, this is the third element, so it's a new name, but it's something that's Stanford is doing, really bizarre thing to Stanford. If the board of alders fails to fill the vacancy, then the board of commission themselves gets to fill the vacancy by appointment. And so that here, that exists. And it's one of the biggest problems I'm seeing around the state. You have a lot of holders. In the city of Stanford, for example, I'm not talking about schools, public. You have people who have been on boards of commission last current 4 or 5 years. They've gone through 2 mayors. And in Stanford, they don't have that third element where the board of commission, because the board of commission doesn't lose that way. So these boards and commissions that exist now have the authority to make their replacements. So I think there's an argument to be made that, does the mayor have control over that? I don't know if the mayor has control over that in the city or any other city, but ultimately they have the power. So we do have a mechanism in the charter to remedy. It requires will on the part of the bodies to do it. And one of the problems is, I'm not being critical of anybody here, is it's more and more difficult. I talked about the civic culture to begin with. It's more and more difficult to find people who are willing to spend time on boards and commissions. That's why I think moving gives you an opportunity to do some consolidations. You can look at these boards and commissions in a sober way and say, why are they being appointed? And I think that it's important to get to use the powers that were having granted. Stanford had the same thing. The president of the council had discretion to make the appointment and didn't exercise. And in Stanford, they don't have the third step where the board of commission gets to fill it. At that point, you're at the end of the process. In fact, legally, I mean, the mayor a couple of weeks ago, right, I basically said, I didn't get about an ordinance. If we don't pass the new charter, you have to pass an ordinance that allows you to start the process over again. Because when the mayor loses it, and then it goes to the board of reps, they lose it. In Stanford, it ends. And you just have this series of situations where people are holding on to their positions. Now, I don't know how you fix that. You have a pretty good provision. And those members, city clerk's office, yeah. I think you guys, city clerk will tell you what the vacancies are. And in some of my charters, we have very, they're public, we have an obligation to publish, whatever. Sorry, guys. There's an obligation to publish them.
Well, this is culture. In some charters, I actually, have a requirement that the city clerk needs to provide notice of upcoming term endings, vacancies, 2 months in advance. Or 3 months in advance, some communities have 3 months in advance, so that the mayor should make the appointments within that time frame, so that when the new term starts, you have a member who can actually start. If you wait until the vacancy occurs, whoever gets appointed is just filling out the remainder of a term. It was 2 or 3 months in that time frame. So, we didn't tighten it up to that extent in this go around in the charter. But we give pretty clear provision that says the mayor has to do it within a certain time frame. It's not a long time. And then we did extend the time we can approve those things, but I think the provisions exist in the charter and they should be enforced. So somebody should take a look and see what those vacancies are. And
We have to look.
yeah,
Like I said, we don't always know that the vacancy is open, and then we'll ask staff for, then we develop the commission, but then also they have different attendance. They don't tell us that it's great.
that explicitly. in the charter.
So just to add, to that, Council, as you indicated that the, city clerk's office can give out some type of notice, right? Because I chair a board, right, the QoS board. And it is really hard to keep up to date with everyone's, timeline is. We do have a governance committee that chair's responsibility, that's only the chair's responsibility. But it's hard to really depend people when they're volunteer.
You know, board city board.
Yes.
Or the private, so it's city board.
The city, yes, yes. And so, so that person, they're in charge of that, right? To say, okay, this coming January, such and such time. It's gonna-
The city clerk has an obligation in charge to let you know.
Okay, so that's big.
So I think that they're right. And it would have been nice to put Patty Waller into the charter. She's the one who keeps track of all things like. That's the problem. I used to say that, I said that when he was here, we can't rely on Patty Waller. When Waller is the mayor's office. And you can't rely on somebody, she's outstanding, she's amazing, but she's not in the charter. It was because she did the job. That's why increasingly I talk about responsibility and my turn to be close to do that. In Stanford, we had to get very elaborate because they're so hard. Anywhere near Stanford. They had a huge problem. And there's some tactical, and I've seen this in other cities too. Cities where I've actually got these in charters, tactical decisions made by mayors in terms of collusion with their legislative body. You know, oh, we have a term limit now. Oh, we forgot we have a term limit in here, and Mary's been on there, and she's indispensable, and they just don't replace Mary. So her term is stand, even though she's term limited. My argument is, if there's a term limit and she reached it, she's off. So that's what it is. Thank you.
Very well, yes. So that is my mind on the hopefully the full 9% before
They're not alone. It's a problem with the city.
All the Rodriguez, yes, thank you. That be Rodriguez.
Thank you. Great work. And then terms of also the everyone on the side. We have been doing the organizations that I've attended a number of meetings, and there is something that you mentioned that is important. And I just like to just reiterate on it. That's one question that I made and I have some more. And that is on the fact that this charter can be revisited less than within 10 years. Is that correct?
You know, the charter can be reviewed by the legislative body as well. You can only have one charter revision at a time, but you could, my very first charter revisions were for the city of Bridgeport in the 80s and 90s. And they did a charter revision every year. They took this section and that section. I don't think that's the way to do it, because charter sections are interrelated, so you can't say we're just going to deal with chapter 3. Because chapter 3 may have something to say about something that's in chapter 7. But they did it every year for about 10 years. And it wasn't very successful, but they did it. But you can do it anytime you want.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking that question is because I was standing at the visiting the term. And I'm not taking into account all the hard work and not what has been done here. But to know that we can revisit this earlier on in a period of years. And then the other question that I have, this is kind of like a question, we know that maybe this is not the time that in terms of the question, we have the changes pertaining to the board of alders, the recommendation, and we have recommendations regarding the renewal terms and also the board of education. Are those to be individual questions individually separated on the ballot for board of alders, for board of education, for mayoral term? And my most important question is that are there any ethical practices or protocols that we should be looking at when developing questions to place on an official ballot? And does the Secretary of State have to visit those questions prior to them being submitted on hold?
All good questions. The issue of the number of questions placed on the ballot is in your discretion as always. And that's a political vote. And so you have to decide how many questions can you put on a ballot physically. Does it make sense to put multiple questions on the ballot? You have one on with this question, or the separate one. The legal issue there is really a political judgment. With regard to ethical standards, the same ethical standards that apply to any other action taken by the board of alders under the ethics code and charter would apply to anything you do, including voting on charter revision. Having the alders vote on the aldermanic compensation provision does not fall within a violation of the ethics ordinance any more than adopting the budget and paying tax. It applies to everybody. So that's not that's not an ethical concern of the student function. The responsibility, even though you may be beneficiaries of those decisions, it doesn't favor any individuals. The Secretary of State looks at them unless there's something that is seen or the Secretary of State doesn't know maybe a little more on the state issues with the state election, but it makes it more of a clearing function or record keeping function, not really on.
Alderman Brown.
I'm able to come to and then, but the former have to say, well, you can be part of it, you do the program, have to do it. But I would wish that have to be all to know, you can make it that, yeah. There is a way to do it, a project to it.
Kind of an oversight, maybe, that lots of early peer theory. I found that, the person started coming to something like that. I'm not saying it's bad, I actually think it's an interesting idea. In Hamden, we established equity, and inclusion commission. And the function, one of the functions of the Equity and Inclusion Commission in Hamden, diversity equity, DEI, the DEI Commission. One of the functions of that DEI Commission is to take a look at compositions of boards and commissions, take a look at the composition of the workforce in the community, to make sure that the standards that you adopt in your charter with regard to diversity, pay, diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity, all the forms of diversity that you have are being reviewed and looked at. So the idea of the DEI commission was that function. That's pretty similar to what we're talking about today. And so, you know, I'll send out. I'm still here covering all this. Okay. Al, reminding me tomorrow to send out what we did in Hamden. To have everybody look at it and see if that's something you want to look at. And what you may want to do, as opposed to creating it, the charter kind of going against the grain of what we're trying to accomplish, is to mandate the creation of a DEI commission with that function. So I kind of correct my initial response that I haven't done this before. I think the DEI commission is kind of an example of how to do it.
I think it's also good to note, Alder, question, and I see the direction that you want to go with this. But it is a process of this board that all boards, commissions, committees are percent the discretion of the president.
No, I think I've been going back, you know, I was going to just go forward, make sure that, I can take everybody, that they know they get. Okay. Now, one,
I think it makes me a question. I think I am. I hear what you're saying, and I'm not saying that I don't agree with that. I'm saying that that wouldn't be something that we would look at by charter. That would be something that we would look at to the creation of a committee, a commission, or a board. And that would go through the president as the rest of our boards, committees, and commissions do. And so I think that, that that's something that you would be interested in. I think that's something that we can have a conversation about.
That's what
That's something that we can have a conversation about. Can I finish my sentence? Thank you. That's something that we could and should have a conversation about as a board, and perhaps look at the creation of an ordinance that would require an oversight committee that would look at the qualifications or the legality of forming boards and commissions of our immigrant community that we all care about. I'm an immigrant also. And so this is something that is important to all of us. To deserve our attention. Thank you. Thank you, Madam.
You know, so,
I would say I don't know for all that, it would just happen. I was gonna feel all of the things that was happening.
any other questions?
No,
Okay, so that would be the end of our questions, for today. As stated earlier, our next meeting will be on the 20th of this month at 6 o'clock here in Cambridge. And, if folks have, questions, comments, anything that you want to, get back to the council, Al will send out, what that deadline date is, because we have a very short window, to work it. And so, if that is it, a motion would be in order.
Thank you, Mr. Jerry.
Second. The second discussion, all those in favor say aye. Thank you.